Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking a closer look at a really tragic event, the 2023 Yeti Airlines Flight 691 crash in Pokhara, Nepal.
Yeah, it's one of those incidents where the initial reports, they pointed towards pilot error, but digging deeper reveals quite a bit more complexity.
It really lets us get into the weeds.
It does. It's very detailed.
So our goal here isn't just to say what happened. We really want to explore the why. How did a seemingly straightforward mistake cascade into such a disaster? We'll try to pull out the key insights for you without getting totally bogged down in technical stuff.
And the mistake itself is, it's quite startling when you first hear it.
It really is. You have an experienced instructor captain, someone who knows these planes, intending to extend the flaps for landing, but instead he feathers both propellers.
Completely shuts down the thrust, essentially.
Right. How does that happen? And how does it lead to the loss of 72 lives? That's the central question we want to unpack.
Okay, so maybe we should start with the basics. Just a quick refresher on flaps and props.
Good idea. So flaps, they're on the wings, right? Extend them, you get more lift at slower speeds. Crucial for landing.
And propellers, well, they provide the thrust. They pull the plane through the air. Pretty fundamental stuff.
Now, in this specific plane, the ATR-72, the cockpit layout is key. You've got the power levers throttle, basically.
Right. Then you'd normally have a speed brake lever in a jet, but this is a turboprop. So instead you have the flap lever.
And importantly, these things called condition levers.
Yes, condition levers. They're specific to turboprops. They control things like fuel flow and propeller speed, but critically, they have a feather position.
Explain feathering again. Why would you ever do that?
Well, two main reasons. If an engine fails in flight, feathering the prop aligns the blades with the airflow, reduces drag dramatically. Very important.
Okay, makes sense.
And the other time is just during the normal shutdown sequence on the ground, after landing.
Got it. So Flight 691 is on approach. The instructor captain, he's in the right seat, giving familiarization training to the captain in the left seat.
Yeah, and he calls for flaps 30. Standard procedure.
But instead of moving the flap lever, he reaches over with his left hand. Remember, he's in the right seat.
Using his non-dominant hand, likely.
And moves both condition levers fully back to the feather position.
Instantly cutting off thrust from both engines. The propellers basically stop pulling the aircraft forward. The engines themselves would go to idle power, no matter what the power levers were set to.
Which is just baffling. How did they not immediately realize that had happened? What went wrong in terms of noticing the error?
Well, that's the next really critical part of this. There were several cues. First, the flap indicator.
Right, in the cockpit. It would still show 15 degrees, not the 30 they'd called for.
Exactly. A clear visual sign that the flaps hadn't moved. That should have been caught.
And weren't there alarms, lights and sounds?
Yes. Just 4 seconds later, literally 4 seconds, the propeller RPM dropped so low that the AC electrical generators went offline.
Okay.
That triggered a master caution chime, an audible warning, and warning lights on the panel. The captain in the left seat actually said something like, "What's that?" acknowledging the warning.
But the instructor didn't respond.
No response recorded. It's worth noting the DC power, the battery power, stayed on, so they didn't lose everything. But still, a major warning.
And the sound, surely feathering both props makes a different noise.
Oh, absolutely. A very distinct change in sound. The report does note the captain in the left seat was wearing noise-canceling headphones.
So maybe he wouldn't have heard it as clearly.
Possibly. But the instructor captain wasn't wearing headphones. He should have noticed.
Yeah.
It really points to a breakdown in what we call crew resource management, or CRM.
Which is basically how the crew works together, communicates, cross-checks things.
Precisely. You have a failure to visually confirm the flap setting. The pilot monitoring didn't call out flaps 30 not set or anything like that. The instructor ignored or missed the warnings.
Even the checklist, the before landing checklist, didn't catch it. That seems like a crucial safety net.
It is, and somehow they went through it, or parts of it, without spotting that the condition levers were wrong, the flaps weren't set. It really makes you question the focus in the cockpit during that phase.
And then the attempt to add power would have done nothing right, because the props were feathered.
Exactly. Pushing the power levers forward wouldn't increase thrust. The engines are essentially disconnected from providing push. Imagine the confusion when they expected acceleration and got nothing.
So they're flying along, no thrust, airspeed dropping, warnings going off, and apparently nobody's quite grasped the fundamental problem yet.
Which is incredibly dangerous, especially given the approach they were flying.
Right, let's talk about that approach. Runway 12 at this new Pokhara airport, it wasn't straightforward, was it?
No, not at all. It was a visual approach, meaning relying on sight rather than just instruments. And because of the terrain, hills all around, it required some pretty tight turns at low altitude.
The report calls it not a stabilized approach. Why is that term important?
Well, a stabilized approach is kind of the gold standard. It means by a certain point, usually 500 feet above the ground, the plane is fully configured for landing gear, down, flap set, on the right speed, on the right path. Minimal adjustments needed.
And this approach didn't allow for that.
Not easily.
Yeah.
You were still maneuvering quite significantly below that 500-foot mark. It inherently increases workload and risk.
And didn't Yeti Airlines themselves have reservations about this approach?
They did. Their own evaluation flights, when the airport was brand new, apparently concluded this runway 12 visual circuit was, and I quote, difficult and not advisable for some operators.
Wow. So the airline knew it was tricky. Why were they still using it? And what about the regulators, the CAN, the Civil Aviation Authority of Nepal?
That's a key question the report touches on, but maybe doesn't fully answer. CAN approved operations on both runways. It seems they didn't properly review. Yeti's specific procedure for this visual approach didn't require a demonstration flight.
That sounds concerning from a regulatory standpoint. Were there, pressures to get the new airport fully operational quickly?
The report implies possibilities, but doesn't state definite causes for CAN's actions. But despite the known difficulty, and now critically, despite having no engine thrust and bleeding airspeed, the crew continued the approach. They initiated that final steep turn towards the runway.
That just seems like an incredibly risky move under the circumstances.
It was. When you bank an aircraft, you need more lift to counteract gravity. More lift requires more speed or a higher angle of attack. They had neither. Their speed was dropping, and without thrust, they couldn't increase it. They were setting themselves up for a stall.
And did they realize the power situation just before the end?
It seems so. In the final seconds, the captain in the left seat is recorded saying, "Power is not coming," or similar, twice. Then there was a very late transfer of control back to the instructor captain.
Too late.
Obviously, tragically, yes. Almost immediately after control transfer, the stick shaker activated.
The stall warning, the plane telling them it's about to lose lift.
Exactly. A violent vibration of the control column. A final urgent warning. The aircraft started losing altitude fast.
What was the instructor's reaction then?
The instinct, it seems, was to try and level the wings and pull the nose up, maybe to clear obstacles or just arrest the descent.
But pulling the nose up at low speed
Increases the angle of attack further, and when you're already on the edge of a stall, it pushes you right over. It kills your remaining airspeed. The left wing stalled completely.
It lost all lift.
Right. And when one wing stalls like that, the aircraft violently rolls towards that stalled wing. It rolled inverted, completely upside down, and plunged into the gorge near the runway.
Such a devastating end. It's mentioned there were no ground casualties, at least.
Yes, a small mercy in such a tragedy. The crash site was in the Seti River Gorge, away from populated areas.
Okay, so that's the sequence. But the report goes deeper, looking at underlying factors. Let's talk about the cockpit design. Weren't the levers designed to prevent this confusion?
You'd think so, and yes, there are ergonomic considerations. The levers have different shapes, different feels.
Oh, so?
Well, the power levers are typically roundish. The flap lever is shaped like a wing profile and airfoil.
Okay.
And the condition levers are often square or rectangular, maybe with ridges. They also have different mechanisms like gates or triggers you have to lift or squeeze.
So why did these safeguards fail here?
Several potential reasons are suggested. One, as we mentioned, the instructor was in the right seat, using his left hand for controls normally operated by the right hand, or vice versa, depending on the specific lever. That lack of familiarity using the non-dominant hand.
Could make the tactile differences less obvious.
Potentially. Also, the actual distance the levers needed to travel from flaps 15 to 30 versus moving the condition levers to feather might have felt quite similar.
So the physical movement wasn't drastically different.
Possibly not enough under pressure. And maybe the feel of the gate mechanism on the condition levers felt a bit like the detent for the flap setting. It's speculation, but these factors likely contributed.
And this wasn't the first time ever an ATR pilot had made this mistake.
No, disturbingly it wasn't. There are documented cases of other ATR crews mistakenly moving condition levers instead of flaps.
But the outcome was different.
Yes. In the other known instances, the crews recognized the mistake almost immediately, likely from the sound change, the lack of flap indication, or the warnings, and corrected it. Reversed the levers, got the thrust back.
Which just highlights again how critical the failure to notice was on Flight 691.
Absolutely. And the workload probably played a huge role in that failure to notice.
You mean the complex approach?
Yes, navigating that demanding visual pattern, low altitude, tight turns, managing the descent rate, it's a high cognitive load.
And he was also teaching the other pilot at the same time.
Exactly. Providing familiarization training adds another layer of complexity and attention division. And crucially, there was no third pilot, no observer in the jump seat, which might have provided another set of eyes.
So, high workload, divided attention.
A recipe for missing things, even critical things.
And we need to come back to the CAN, the regulator. Their approval of this approach, despite warnings, it feels like a significant piece of the puzzle.
It does. The report raises flags about the oversight. It also mentions sort of broader systemic points, like the fact the official report only included limited excerpts from the cockpit voice recorder, not a full transcript.
Interesting.
And limited discussion on the quality of training, perhaps, and a recommendation that Nepal really needs an independent body to investigate accidents, separate from the regulator itself. These suggest potential weaknesses in the system.
And then there's the whole context of the airport itself. This brand new Pokhara International Airport. There were issues around its opening.
There were certainly reports and allegations suggestions it was rushed open, maybe for political reasons, concerns about construction quality, inflated costs, and the fact that it hasn't attracted the international flights it was built for, partly due to geopolitical issues, means it's struggling financially. It paints a picture of a project where maybe, just maybe, operational safety wasn't the only priority.
So when you put it all together, it's really not just one pilot making one mistake.
Not at all. It's that initial, yes, critical human error, but it happened within a system that failed to catch it. It was amplified by the challenging procedure, the high workload, potential gaps in training or oversight, and maybe even questionable decisions about the airport's readiness, a chain reaction.
Right. So wrapping this up, this deep dive really shows how an almost unbelievably basic error, grabbing the wrong levers, kicked off this catastrophic chain.
An error that went unnoticed because of breakdowns in monitoring and communication, happening during a really difficult approach that maybe shouldn't have been approved or used under those circumstances.
An approach flagged by the airline itself, yet approved by the regulator, all against a backdrop of, well, potential systemic issues in the wider aviation environment there, and questions surrounding the airport project itself.
It's a stark reminder of how layers of safety can fail.
It really is. That such a fundamental mistake could lead to such horror. It really makes you stop and think.
And maybe that leads to a final thought for you listening. What does this tell us about just how vital robust safety systems are? Not just the technical ones, but the procedures, the training, the communication, the independent oversight, especially in high-stakes fields like aviation.
Yeah, and maybe how similar vulnerabilities might exist elsewhere. In other complex systems we rely on every day. It really forces you to consider the interplay between human fallibility, we all make mistakes, and the systems that are supposed to contain those mistakes that sometimes tragically don't.